Thank you for inviting me, Jean-Michel and Philippe, for this very interesting session. And it's my pleasure to present my experience with 4D flow MRI in heart and valve disease. So I usually work with a GE commercially available machine, 1.5T, with a 4D flow sequence, which consists in a whole thorax acquisition, which means no planes to define, which is a very important difference with the 2D acquisition, which needs some experienced technician. So even beginners as a technologist can perform it, and in my practice is very important. For the patient, it's very nice also because it's a free breathing acquisition, which is ECG gated, but without any respiratory gating. And typically, the sequence lasts 7 minutes, more minutes, 2 minutes. So it's, in 2 words, it's an easy acquisition. We still use contrast enhancement, but in practice, less and less. We are not at the point to make non-contrast acquisition, but we improve our techniques to work without contrast. But if we want to ensure the anatomy, we use contrast. And for the post-processing, which is an important point, we currently use a cloud-based solution from Arteris. So I will present our 4-year experience in cardiac disease with 4D flow in our institution. And mainly, we use it for valvular regurgitation, non-really stenosis, because in practice, I think echocardiographers don't really need the help of MRI for aortic stenosis, for example. And for congenital heart disease, we are not in a typical congenital heart disease center, but we have regularly a case of grown-up congenital disease. So this is a typical clinical situation. So my topic is really a clinical topic. It's our daily life in our center. So this is a case of atrial septal defect, which is really obvious at here. You see the flow from the left atrium to the right atrium in the different incidents. It's very nice. It's nice looking image. And this was completely missed by TTE. So it was a young lady with enlarged right ventricle and short breath. And she was asking, they were not able to conclude with TTE. So, and I was surprised because it was obvious with 4D flow, but this is real life. So this is a nice case. It was just published last month in European Heart Journal of a large coronary fistula between left coronary and right atrium. So everything in the picture, the fistula, even the tricuspid regurgitation, and with this image we were able to calculate the shunt in a very precise fashion. And after the embolization, to follow the patient. So you just need this picture without any additional information to get the information. This is really the visual aspect of 4D flow. You have a lot of visual information, and you make a lot of diagnosis just by looking the image without quantification. For this case, you see it was a dysfunction of aortic prothesis. You see nicely there is a stenosis with a high-speed flow, obvious regurgitation, and you saw in the same times the dilatation and the wall shear stress here on the aortic arch. And already speaking by visual interpretation, here you have an aortic regurgitation, you have a mitral regurgitation, and visually it's also obvious that the mitral regurgitation is much more severe than the aortic regurgitation, which was not so obvious for echocardiography. When you have two regurgitations, they may be confused, but with 4D flow, just by looking, you were able to have a very important information. And speaking about clinical decision, because finally all these images are to help for clinical decision, this is really a case where also it was a dysfunction of a prosthetic valve here, and on TTE, because of the artifacts, the metallic artifacts of the Bayer prosthesis, they were not able to tell if the regurgitation was intraprothetic or paraprothetic. If it was paraprothetic, a patient should go to new surgery. If it was intraprothetic, patient should go for TAVI. And here again, obviously, you don't need any specific knowledge to see that the leakage was clearly intraprothetic. And so just with this image, the patient went to TAVI. So we can go further now, and we go for quantification, because of course with 4D flow we are able to quantify. And now the question is how to quantify flows. For me, there is two ways: direct measurement by dynamic contouring of the leak of the shunt, but it shows that it may be difficult sometimes, because sometimes the leakage is complex, and sometimes it's too leakage, and you have some disturbance, so it's difficult. And you have also indirect measurement, as usual, calculating systemic flow, pulmonary flow, or mitral flow. But the interesting point for internal validation of your measurement, the values between direct and indirect measurement should match. And if my message, if the values do not match, there is something wrong somewhere, so you have to carefully check for flow disturbance, because there is a learning curve. There is many things which are responsible for flow errors in measurements. And this is, I think, the weakness of 2D flow measurement, because maybe you are used to measure flows with 2D. Sometimes you make mistakes, but you don't know the reason of your mistake because you are not able to see the whole picture. But if some cases are very difficult, and in this case I rely on indirect measurements. So let's see an example of aortic regurgitation. You contour the leak. Generally, you are not too close to the starting point of the leak, because in my experience, the measurement is not correct. You don't have to go too far too, because you have some mixed flows, for example, with a mitral inflow. So you just trace your ROI, follow the ROI over the cardiac cycle, so you have your point. And in this case, you have 7.5 liters per minute of regurgitation directly. Now you can, in the same patient, calculate the systemic flow. It's easy. Generally, I'm just below the valve, because this is a point where there is less turbulence. And here you have 11.4 liters per minute. And the pulmonary flow provides you 4 liters per minute. So the difference is 6.4, which is very close to the 7.5 of the direct measurement. So, in my experience, you are quite sure it's a correct measurement. So you can derivate the regurgitant fraction at 65%. So now the important point is the variability between intra and interobserver variability to validate any new technique. And the difficulty here is that the gold standard is echocardiography, transthoracic or TTE. And TTE is a gold standard, but everybody knows that it's a bad gold standard, but you have to compare to it if you want to try to publish in a cardiologic review, at least. So we compare the variability between echo and 4D flow MRI, and so the standard deviation of our measurement from me and my colleague, who has a good experience with 4D flow too, and it was 4%. So it means that the precision is 8% with 4D flow compared to 24% only with TTE, which means that the precision of 4D flow is much better than TTE. Now the Bland and Altman analysis provides you also important information, and it was already found in different publications. The tendency of MR to underestimate flow for TTE compared to TTE, but of course I will finish to say that this is TTE which overestimates flow compared to MRI. Because we have some good clues to make this assertion. But in terms of regurgitant fraction, the systematic difference is 6.4%, and it's increasing with severity of, for example, for aortic regurgitation. So it means when you compare, because the recommendation of TTE evaluation is not numeric, but it's a semi-quantitative, well, it's a qualitative evaluation from a multi-parametric approach. This is the European and also American recommendation from for regurgitation evaluation with TTE. So the final message of TTE is only, is it a mild, moderate, or severe regurgitation? And nothing else is asked to the echocardiographyst. So we have to answer the same question if we want to compare. And the threshold of TTE are rather 30 and 50% to separate mild to moderate and severe. But with 4D flow, we change this threshold to compensate for this systematic difference. And after this change to 20 and 40%, then the miracle happens. We have a very good correlations. And because usually in the publications there is very large differences between MRI, all publication with 2D MRI, and echo. So in a way, people say that MR should be the reference standard, at least for ejection fraction. But usually the decisions are made by the cardiologist, and when they use MR, sometimes you have a strong difference, and in fact nobody knows at the end which is a good number. So, and after you have to decide to operate or not patients. So if you think of that, a lot of patients are operate on very fuzzy numbers. It's my opinion. So we reached a very good agreement, and it was the last one. So, and now we do the same job with mitral regurgitation. So, and And also we did the same, and we changed the threshold with a little difference. We found the optimal threshold to be 20 as 37%, but it's very close to aortic regurgitation thresholds after correction, and we found a very good agreement again, with always a tendency to have more severe degrees in TTE compared to 4D flow. So it's almost finished. I can conclude that 4D flow provide aortic and mitral classification close to a consensus of experienced echocardiographists. We have the chance in our institution to have a very kind and experienced echocardiographists. It provides quantitative values, which is a huge advantage compared to TTE, with a good reproducibility. And in complex case, especially congenital case, or in patients with multiple regurgitation, for example, you have the complete pictures with 4D flow. So my feeling is that in some years, 4D flow will be the gold standard, and I hope that before sending patient to operating room after echo, maybe except in obvious cases, they will ask for an MRI, and I think it takes time, but in my institution now, I have the pleasure to have some requests from the cardiologist, because sometimes they feel they are not sure of what they say, and this is a true life, but and we are happy to do the job this day. Thank you very much for your attention.